distance and the things that we say to one another. But you're in for a rare treat. What Eric has to present, I believe, is instrumental in our walk, in our desire to hear what the Father is saying, in our quest to unravel mysteries that are in the Scripture to keep us going on our journey. So I invite you to enjoy what he has to say and just take in the richness of what is in the Word and in the letters of the Hebrew language. Love you, man. Go get him.
Semi. Yeah, I'm behind you.
There's two.
Where are you upstairs?
Downstairs. You go grab them. You'll grab them.
Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Hey, Vav, Zion, Het, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samik, Ayin, Pei, or Fe, Zadik, Kuf, Resh, Shin, Tav. That's the alphabet. Of course, if you listen to somebody who knows how to speak Hebrew better, like Brad Scott, who teaches, then you'll have other guttural sounds. Het, het, that would be hey, it would be kayan. I've, for the sake of the record, kind of English-sized it, saying it to where it's easy to pronounce. So this isn't a formal Hebrew class, as it were, trying to be proper. This is simply to make it apprehendable. So the point of all this discussion here is hopefully for your benefit. This isn't for any regard of anything else other than to make this language useful to you. So the past occasions that I've had to try to present this, I've tried to go kind of quickly in order to give people a kind of a view, as if you're looking through a telescope and seeing what's way out in the distance that you can't quite see, but at least you know there's something that you're headed towards. What I'm going to hopefully do on this occasion is to slow down and hopefully make this so that people feel comfortable with this language, with these letters. And I'll start off by saying why. And so what I would say is that if anybody has a question, feel free to say, well, wait a minute, what's up with that? To slow these down, because even when I think I'm going slow, I'm still apparently going pretty quick. So, and that's not the objective here. So my thought was to have 4 meetings. And the first, the reason for 4 is because I think that this is a model and a pattern and a structure of everything that exists in the universe. It's all comprised of these letters. I know that's a vague statement, and you know, I don't expect you to know what that means, but if anybody knows about chemistry, we have now what we call the periodic table, which is a list of all the known elements, and everything that exists in physical matter is comprised of those physical elements. Neither more nor less. Now, there may be more that we don't know about, because we're always discovering new configurations, but it's simply, in terms of chemistry and atom-like structure, you have a nucleus, and then you've got a number of electrons around the nucleus, and that's all there is to it. If there's one electron around the nucleus, it's a certain element. If there's two electrons, it's a different element. And there's no difference in the substance of matter. It's just simply how many electrons are around the nucleus. And I'm mentioning that for a reason, but just to say, so the entire universe that exists is simply a matter of nucleuses and electrons, and how many do you put together, and it's like, the simplicity of that, to form this complexity, is very ironic, and it's kind of the same thing regarding this. So the simplicity of these 22 letters, how can this form all that exists, both material and immaterial, both as a structure of relationship, a structure of thought, which are immaterial substance, a structure of the things that we put in the label of the spirit realm as well as the physical realm. It's like, well, how can these 22 letters do that or be that? Which hopefully I will try to explain what I see. So the point of this is to say, I've asked some people, in fact, I'll throw this out to you. This particular banner here, I've asked people, and I'm throwing this out there rhetorically, but for you to consider for a moment, in your own selves, how does that seem to you? Do you feel like any regard for it? Not necessarily, say, intellectually, because it may be strange letters, but you may know what language it is, but nevertheless, do you feel an affinity with it? Do you feel like, dude, that's kind of weird, that's kind of bizarre, that's kind of cult-like, or is that kind of like some strange ancient language, or does it seem like kind of warm and fuzzy, or does it seem kind of harsh?
Affinity.
You feel an affinity towards that?
Okay.
Does anybody else have any strong emotions one way or the other regarding just the letters on that? It's just as an experiment, I'm just asking. I asked certain people, and they're just like, gee, I haven't got a clue. And I thought, I just asked somebody last week, like, I thought, boy, this is really strange. I don't know, because I've been looking at these things for so long. I no longer can use myself as a guinea pig, you might say, to say, what do I think about these things? Because I've been staring at them for so long, I've lost all objective reference. This is His name. The name of the Almighty, the one we love, the one we want to spend eternity with, the one that we say is the all in all, the one who is in us and through us, and we are because of Him. And it's like, and that's His language. Shouldn't there be some kind of an inner chord of resonance? That's my hypothesis. My thinking is like, gosh, shouldn't it somehow relate to this inner chord? And whether or not it does, it's just a curiosity. But I'm just saying that that's what that is. This here is, now this may not be you might say a classical definition. You might not look in a dictionary and say, what is Paleo-Hebrew? It may or may not exist, I'm not sure. But there's this phrase, Paleo, where we get Paleolithic, which is from the ancient, prehistory. Anything Paleo is before, you might say, modern record of time. So Paleolithic would be a term that archaeologists might use. So Paleo-Hebrew is the ancient Hebrew. I'll make reference to a number of people here and their studies, because I'm not trying to give an overview of all their studies, nor should I presume to speak for them. But if you have any interest in these things, I would encourage everybody, whether in this room or who happens to hear this tape, to investigate of your own efforts these other sources. One is Frank Seekins. He's in Scottsdale, Arizona, and he wrote a book about Hebrew word pictures. And when I first saw that, he basically shows how this is the modern, present shape of the letters. Now, just so you know what this banner is here. In getting Frank Seekins' book, he showed how there is an ancient Canaanite, there's the book right there. If I could hold that up. This is a great book, Hebrew word pictures, and he's got a number of other books, but here's, for example, Lamed. So he shows the modern shape, and he shows the most ancient designs of that there's any record written on rocks or scrawled here and there on pottery or whatever, and he says it came from Lamed, meaning a cattle goad or a rod. And so you can see that that's like, you hold it upside down like that, that's like a shepherd's crook of modern shape. And then he shows these various pictures are various types of the forms of the letter that has been found throughout the ages up until the modern shape. So in first reading this, it was like, oh, that's interesting that happened. And you go, well, it's curiosity, but so what? Oh, that's the title, by the way, of this speech, is, or this event, this discussion here this weekend is, so what? And the reason I say that is because I've had people say that to me regarding these studies. It's like, I'm talking about his name. It's like, well, so what? We're Christians, we're saved, we're believers, who cares what his name is? Whether it's English, whether it's Jesus, whether it's Yeshua, whether it's Isu, whether it's Yeshua, Isu. So what? So what about the festival? So what about the Sabbath day? We've already got Sunday. He doesn't matter. I even had someone say, I can't believe that God's up there, and every time you hear somebody say the word God or Lord, he goes, it's like, is he cringing? I mean, and if he's not cringing, then why should we cringe? Why shouldn't we just go, just doesn't matter. He knows my heart. It's like, well, to a certain regard, that may be true. And I'm not trying to disparage anybody who chooses to believe that or to think that. This isn't occasion to knock anybody's thoughts around. This is simply an occasion to look at this other point of view and to say, so what? What is there as a benefit for us? And is it only a benefit for us, or is it a benefit towards relationship with him, which is what the benefit of all things ought to be towards? If it's just me and my benefit, you could even say, well, even in a spiritual dimension, that's rather hedonistic, or that's rather self-absorbed or self-centered. And if the point, though, is to say, well, the point is then that we should know him better. And it's like, well, Paul addresses that, and he says, well, yes, that we should know him, but better that we should be known by him. And that's where Yeshua, in the last day, he even said this is going to happen. He separates people, a whole bunch of people, are going to say, what are we doing on this side? We did miracles in your name. We cast out demons in your name. We did mighty works, and we went around preaching in your name. And he says, I never knew you. It's like, what does that mean? And to me, that's the scariest verse in the whole Bible. Ever since I was a little kid, that's the scariest verse. Who are those people? How did they end up on that side, thinking that they had no chance of ending up on that side? And it's like, that should be, at least as far as I'm concerned, my highest regard of diligence. How do I not end up on that side? Well, it's not a matter of how do you not end up on that side, because if you're driving down the road and you're making sure you're not going to hit that line and that line, you're going to run into something else. It's like you need the perspective, and you keep on the perspective. Yeshua said, if a man puts his hand to the plow and turns around and is looking, you're going to go off track and you're not worthy of him. You must keep. When they were plowing back in the olden days, they had a marker down at the end of the road, and you just keep your mind on that marker. And of course, that marker is Yeshua. And so, well, then why even talk about this? If we have Yeshua, then what's the point of so what? What? And this is, I'll make a rather outlandish statement. This is Yeshua. So if he's the one that our minds are set on, that we're being transformed into, which is the desire of our heart, do we recognize him? Do you see Yeshua here? This is Yeshua, and I'll explain what that means. This here is little iconic glyphs, you might say, of the pieces of the Mishkan. Now you could say, well, gee, there's other pieces. There's a veil in here, and there's a covering here, and those aren't drawn on there, then why just those? Well, I'll explain that in a minute, but I'll say this also. This is Yeshua, and it works at many different levels. I could describe it at one level, or I could describe it in 1,000 levels. And one thing to say about this is that regarding what I'm going to try to explain here, it may sound, and I may end up doing this, where I'm like bouncing all over the place and going all around, but here's the thing. Everything that exists is a manifestation of this. Therefore, in talking about this, we could talk about any subject on the face of the earth. We could talk about an interpersonal dynamic and it goes back to this. We could talk about the stars, it goes back to this. We could talk about the parables of Yeshua and the sower and the seed, and it goes back to this. We could talk about the 10 Commandments. We could talk about the first word, which we will, talk about the first word in the Bible, Bereshit, the word in the beginning, and it goes back to this. We could talk about his name, and it's all about this. Therefore, every subject is fair game, and though it may sound like, gee, we're just bouncing all over the place, it's for the sake of bringing everything in to an understanding of how it all relates. So it's not really all across the board. Yes?
Frank Seekin, how do you spell that last name?
S-E-E-K-I-N-S.
Thank you.
How does the Hebrew alphabet, he says alphabet, but alphabet is actually a Greek phrase. Alpha is the first letter in Greek, bet is the second letter. In Hebrew, it's aleph and bet. So I try to distinguish, if I'm talking about the Hebrew, I'll say aleph bet. And sometimes for the sake of speaking English to English people, I say alphabet and I try to correct it. It's like, when you say alphabet, then you're talking about what you think you know, which is A through Z. But this isn't the alphabet, it's the aleph bet. And so here's a pertinent thing regarding this whole talk. This isn't us trying to understand some Hebrew stuff. This is the mind of Yeshua revealed to us. Therefore, if we want to understand him, to know him, to be known of him, we should be conformed to him. And therefore, you can say, well, it's not fair that the Hebrews get to learn this language, be born into it, and we've learned English and Greek and Latin and so forth and so on, and why should we be at a disadvantage? Aren't we acceptable the way we are? Yes, of course. Are we saved by this? No, we're saved by the blood of Yeshua, by his free gift of grace and mercy bestowed to us. This has nothing to do with salvation. This has to do with knowing the Creator. Comprehending, which is to not say us grasping his mind, but becoming one with his mind, becoming one with his heart. Now, just last weekend, I had people say, you sound Gnostic. It's like, I know this sounds Gnostic, but I don't agree that it is. They said, well, you're in danger of becoming a Gnostic. You're in danger of becoming a Judaizer. And it's like, it's neither. And I hopefully will be able to explain to you my perspective. Again, not to dump my stuff on you, but I'm trying to address the questions which I hear, which I ask of myself, which we have discussed amongst ourselves regarding these things, so as to have a ready, valid, solid answer for every question that might arise concerning what we believe. That's so what? Why should we regard these things? Well, the truth is the truth. Why should we regard the truth? You could boil it down and say, well, why should somebody regard the Almighty Creator of all things? Why not just live your life and go, one of these days we'll see what happens. Why should we regard our ways? Let me go back to Frank Seekins for a moment. The most ancient scrawlings of letters seem to be in the land of Canaan, Canaanites. And then the Israelites came into the land of Canaan at the time of Moses. Of course, Abraham was there before. Abraham and Isaac, and then Jacob's sons via Joseph went into Egypt, and when they came out a couple hundred years later, it was actually only about 80 years later. We might get into that. But the point is, when they came back to the land of Canaan, here's a question. In history at best, according to archaeological records or Bible records, is subject to personal opinion. I was talking to one friend who has been to Egypt and seen these things, and he says these things are at least 10,000 to 15,000 years old. It's like, well, according to the biblical record, this guy Mitzrayim, who was the father of the Egyptians, was the grandchild of Ham, or one of the guys that came out of the ark. It's like, well, gee, the ark was only 3,500 years ago. So how could Egypt be 15,000 years old? And even if it was, some people say the pyramids pre-existed the flood. Even if that's true, the genealogies of the Bible, according to starting from Adam, are only 6,000 years. Well, The thought that I could present the point is option that the world maybe is only 6,000 years old when the artifacts of Egypt are 10 to 15,000 seems ludicrous. And to anybody who doesn't have any reason to believe the numbers and the reckonings in the Bible, why should they believe this stuff? Why should they? And if they say, look, I've been there, I've seen this stuff, it's 10 to 15,000 years old, and it's not even the most ancient, the Sumerian is more ancient. It's like, do I sound like a fool to be suggesting that I might believe this other evidence that says it's only 6,000 years old? And if so, if I say, well, I tend to believe the 6,000 year rather than the 15,000 year, then I understand this, I automatically have lost all credibility for anything else I say, because it's based on foolishness. Presumption, whatever. It's like, so what I'm saying regarding this is like, I can't prove that I'm right, I can't prove that he's wrong. What's that? About 2006 or anything? Oh, no. Anyway, I'm just trying to regard other people's insights, so not to be distracted, but if anybody has a pertinent thing to remark, it'd be good to acknowledge. And so what I'm saying is here, I talked to this one person who said, the Jewish person who has studied the alphabet thoroughly, they say, listen, we have no regard for the Canaanite letters. Because, they said, the Canaanites were into idolatry of the created thing. Therefore, if you ask Frank Seekins, oh, Lamed, that's a cattle goat. That's an object. We don't worship an object. Therefore, we're not going to even think of a cattle goat. You don't necessarily think of a cattle goat when you look at that letter. It's just a lamed. What's a lamed? It's the letter. It's the phonetic sound L. When you think of English, L, you don't think of what does the L mean. It's just a letter. It's just a sound. So in Hebrew modern times, at least according to this one very scholarly individual, they said, don't even talk about the Canaanite. Those guys were overthrown. The Almighty said to eradicate them and their culture, and we want nothing to do with them. So, to a modern Jewish point of view, at least from what they said, when they look at a word and they write it like this, they're thinking of what the word means. That's not exactly true with the Paleo, because each letter means something. So if you look at this and say, well, that's shaped like a shepherd's staff. Well, the Greek way of thinking is object. The Hebrew way of thinking is more verb, more action. So you could say, well, the Greek way of interpreting a Hebrew letter is that is the shepherd's staff. Is it? Yeah. Is there anything wrong with that? No. But how far does that take you? It takes you to the point of identity. What does a shepherd's staff do, and what does it represent? Well, it represents authority, right? If you're the shepherd, you got the staff. If you saw a crowd of people out in a field with a bunch of sheep, and one of them was holding the staff, you'd say, oh, that guy's the one in charge. He's got the shepherd's staff. What does he do with it? Well, he could grab a sheep with it, he could poke you with it, he could beat a wolf with it, and he could just say, hey, I'm the guy with the staff. He could, well, okay, so what does the lamed mean? It means all those things. It means, then, what do you do with that authority? So it also implies not just that you have authority or the representation of authority, it implies what you do with it, which is teach. And if you teach, it suggests learning. So the lamed also suggests teaching and learning. It has to do with then governing. So you can say, well, now, bring this down to reduce it. What does it mean? It means all of that and more. So this is the way I see these letters.
Can I interrupt you for a second?
Excuse me?
Can I
Yes.
When you talking about Greek versus Hebrew thinking,
Yes.
could you say that you say Hebrew thinks more of an action? Is that correct?
Yeah, the way, and this is now my interpretation of saying this. If I think of a hammer, well, here, a pencil, that's very simple.
Pencil's a question, right?
If someone says, what is a pencil, define it in Greek terms. Piece of wood, about this long, got an eraser, got a piece of lead in it. Designed to maybe fit in your hands. If you look at the Hebrew way, it'd say, it writes.
Okay.
Bring it back to essence. The Hebrew is an essence, so what's the functionality?
Function is right versus
Essence.
Function and essence in Greek is more what it looks like. And I would take it one step further in terms of how to grasp what the meanings of all these letters are, which is to say, what do you do with a pencil? You could say, well, it writes, but what is writing? Writing is you having an inner desire, which is to communicate. You have an inner thought, which is trapped in this ethereal realm of inside your being somewhere, and your body is this mechanism, this robotic mechanism by which if you stick this thing, this pencil in your hand, you can now cause it to express on the outside, which is an inside event, which has no other way to be expressed. So the pencil, the hand then, through your hand, the hand is given us as the incorporate, say, part of our mechanism to express what's inside and make it outside. That's an interesting thing about the hand, and I'm saying that on purpose because these two letters represent the hand. And it comes to that for a reason. So, but then the hand uses a tool. Now the hand, if you do sign language, or I might gesture, and I can express some things with the hand, but the hand is designed to grasp this tool. So you could say, well, what is a pencil? The Hebraic concept of a pencil is that when you have this inner thought concept that you want to express, this pencil is the vehicle by which you can cause that thing to become apprehensible by others. You understand that?
Another way might be to express your will.
To express your will. It's a tool to express your will, and your will is the comprehension of your mind to another's mind, your heart to another's heart.
So in describing it, does the Hebrew actually, when you thought of doing the action, do they also describe the pencil as well as what it does and how I can use it?
You know,
Yes?
to answer that question, I would have to back up and
You probably need to repeat the question. I don't know how
Oh,
far this
yeah.
mic carries.
you want to say it a little bit louder? Or no?
Could you say also in talking about the Hebrew thinking, as when not only does the Hebrew do describe a pencil and what it looks like, but do they also describe what you do with it and the action that involves in process of using it?
So he was saying that when a Hebrew mind reference describe this object, I'm putting in my own words what you said. How much does it involve? Does it describe both the object and the function and the desire?
Right.
And how much does it do? I would say this. If there was a way to answer that question authoritatively, where I could say, this is what the Greeks think, this is what the Hebrews think, and if you're a Hebrew, you're going to think like that, and so now from your earliest childhood, your mind is molded to form into one who expresses these things when you say these things. I don't think it's that cut and dry. I think it's more a matter of saying, the reason for mentioning the difference between Greco-Roman, or Greek or Hellenistic thinking versus Hebraic thinking is not for a classification as much as to give us the advantage of a broadened perspective. In other words, if you didn't ever hear the term Greek thinking versus Hebrew thinking, you just think. You just think the way you think. And suddenly when someone comes up and says, hey, there's a couple different ways to think, you go, oh, well now how do I think? It's not a matter of how does somebody else think, it's a matter of how do you now think?
The frame of reference.
It's a frame of reference. So to suggest that others may think this way or that way when they speak is to say, who knows? But now that you can comprehend enough of what I'm saying to even formulate the question, indicates that you get it enough to even say that. You now say, oh, so when you describe the object, there's the object, there's the verb, there's the intention, there's the desire of what you do with the intention, which is to say communicate it. And so therefore, when you talk about a pencil, you do all those at once so fast you can't even distinguish. Or you can slow it down and actually distinguish in your own self. What am I really doing here? And I will take that concept to show you one thing here real quick. And I know I'm jumping across the board, but just to tie this into this and give you a reference. As a way of description. This is the fence of the Mishkan, Hebrew word for the tabernacle. Big white fence, I believe it was like 8 feet tall or something, 9 feet tall, and a 4-colored woven embroidery door. in the middle of the wilderness, in the darkness, outside the fence, which is where they had the red heifer sacrifice. Outside the gates is where Yeshua was crucified. Right inside was the altar of sacrifice. Towards the back end was the set-apart place, inside which were these items, but halfway between the set-apart place and the altar of sacrifice was the bronze laver. Inside the set-apart place, then, you have the menorah on the left, the table of showbread on the right. Right in front of you against the veil was the altar of incense. And on the other side of the veil, in the most set-apart place, the Holy of Holies, was the Ark of the Covenant. Now, the word showbread, it's like, well, what's showbread? Well, the word panim in Hebrew means actually the same word as faces. Now, this, and I'll try to go into this later, but this lines up with the ayin, which lines up with Judgment Day. When I say it lines up with, I'll show you that in a moment, but I'm just trying to make a reference. So what has Judgment Day got to do with faces, panim? And why was there 6 piles, or 6 loaves of bread on each stack? Well, in Judgment Day, and I'm trying to show you how some of this thinking goes, trying to show you correlations of thought here. On Judgment Day, Yeshua said he's going to separate, as it were, the sheep from the goats, the wheat from the tares, those who get in the kingdom from those who are not getting into the kingdom. It's like a pretty austere, scary day. That's the one somber day. Yom Kippur is reference to that in the Hebraic calendar, where you don't eat all day and you look at your entire life and you search your soul on that day without eating, and you look at yourself. Now the letter ayin is an eye in the Paleo glyph, shape, icon. And it's an eye speaking of the deep fountains of your soul. It's also just the eyeball. It also then means understanding and comprehension, but not just comprehension intellectually, though it is also that, but it's like this deep knowing. So just like talking about a pencil, how deep can you go with a pencil? Well, it writes. Well, it's a piece of wood. Well, that's on the surface, like the eyeball, but how deep can you go? Which is exactly what we are addressing. How deep can anyone go on any subject? Well, I was looking at this and saying, well, there's 6 loaves here and 6 loaves there. So if he was going to judge us on 6 things, what might those 6 things be? Now, this is my conjecture. It's like, well, he's certainly going to judge us on our behavior, our actions, but he also said he's going to judge us on every word. He's also going to judge us on our thoughts. And what's behind your thoughts? Because those first, only 2 that are visible, evident, are behavior and words, but then you've got motives, you've got inclinations, and then you've actually got the intentions of the heart. Well, now there's 6 different things at 6 different levels. And then I could think of 6 more that are on other aspects of levels, which that's a whole other subject to go on to. But the point is, what's he going to look at when he judges us? You know, he could simply sit there, saved or not, in or out, pretty cut and dry. But he said he's going to reward for what we did unto him. He says everything in our whole life is going to be picked up and set in the fire, which, just as a reference, is the sheen, the consuming fire, the teeth. Everything of our life that consisted of wood, hay, and stubble will be consumed. Anybody whose life is not of him will be destroyed, consumed, under eternity. But he who is the essence of fire, El Shaddai, the Almighty, will be transformed into his image. So we should become of the same essence of him. So here there's a little thought. What is the one thing that's not afraid of fire?
More fire.
Well, water gets vaporized in fire. Water maybe can put fire out, but water is evaporated and dissipated. But what?
More fire.
More fire. So it's like, oh yeah, fire's not afraid of fire. It's like, oh boy, I'm with my friends, you might say. So he who is El Shaddai, the consuming fire, he who appears like with fire in his eyes and his hair inflamed and his feet like blazing bronze, and who the pillar of fire rested above the Ark of the Covenant, on and on and on. The visions of the Almighty in his throne room is a throne of fire surrounded by fire. And the word, there's 2 angels, there's the seraphim and the cherubim, and the the cherubim, the essence of the Ruach, His Holy Spirit that He put in us, will be revealed as His essence, which is the essence of fire. But the devil's not. So when he says, I'm going to throw him into the lake of fire, no, not the lake of fire. It's like, hey, yeah, we get to go to the lake of fire, and we're going to be the essence of fire too. It's not going to touch us. It's not something to be scared of because we're going to be like Him. But everybody that's not of Him will indeed be consumed and tormented. There was a picture once, kind of a famous ancient painting from hundreds of years ago. Most people might think of Judgment Day as being this place where the Almighty is sitting there and just throwing these people into the furnace. But this showed a picture of, and this is more like the biblical point of view, where Yeshua is coming back, and the Bible prophesies that people say, hide us from the face of Him who comes. And they're running to the rocks and saying, fall on us, hide us. And people in this painting were themselves of their own volition fleeing into hell. It was a place to escape His presence. And it's like, He's not necessarily going to send them. Well, I should go on record here. The Bible does say they will be sent. It says that the fires of hell are prepared for the devil and his angels, and that humans who don't choose to be with Him for eternity are going to be sent there. So just to back up. But humans are like, by their choices, choosing to run there on purpose. And that if there is simply, maybe it's a place that He designed as torment. I'm not saying it's not. But all He has to do is show up and say, well, here I am. I'm not designing a place of torment. I'm just showing up. And all of us who are offended by Him and don't want to be Him are saying, oh, this is a place of torment. And it's like, He doesn't have to create a bad place. He just has to be Himself. And it is a place of torment to those that don't know Him and love Him. That's what I'm saying? So the point about that is to say, well, this is Him. This should not be a place of torment. This is what, this is the essence of El Shaddai right here. This is what He's given us. And I'll show what I mean by that. So the point is, by saying then, go back to the pencil thing, how do people think? How far can you go? When you think of a pencil, when you think of the depth of that Hebraic mindset, I will suggest that though there are 6 faces or 12 essences to perhaps judge, and that may be metaphorical, maybe there's 12, 6 and 6 because there was 12 tribes of Israel. Maybe 12 plays into, the number 12 happens to be the Lamed, and perhaps back up. In the Hebrew way of counting, that's not a 12. A 12 is a 2 plus a 10. The Lamed, when it gets to 10, this then goes to 20, and then 30. So the Lamed's actually a 30. But I'm thinking in terms of my reference that Lamed's 12. So some of this, which is my reference for making this manageable, there's 22 letters. Well, they won't say that's a 22. They'll say, well, just to show you real quick, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100, 200, 300, 400. And then Aleph can also be 1,000. So when they count, like for example, if you have a Tanakh, you'll see a Yod, meaning verse 10, but verse 11, there is not a Kaf. Verse 20 is a Kaf. Verse 11 is Yod, Aleph. Okay, so you have to understand the way the modern Jewish writings is, and understand there's now 2 different ways of thinking. So when you say, well, what's the Hebraic way of thinking? It's like, hey, it's all what you make of it. Yeah.
Eric, I like the pencil. That's a great illustration. Would you illustrate for us just the difference between the idea of the Greek and the Hebrew with the term of a key?
Sure.
Definition of a key.
Before I wanted to point out that part of this is you got to distinguish between ancient Hebrew thinking versus even modern Hebrew thinking or Jewish thinking. The Jews that returned to Israel were just as westernized and Hellenized as the rest of us. That is, there's a disconnect. So what we're looking at here, we're actually having to go back into the ancient ways, which there is no definitive, like when Eric's being asked, well, can you give me a definitive way to say this or that? We're researching this to try to determine, to the best of our ability, how far back can we go and actually become and be accurate in terms of the way someone might have thought. Like what were they thinking when they wrote what they wrote? How were they thinking?
There's one other thing about this. One is to look at this and say, okay, if this is the way the ancient Israelites thoughts, and this is the way Moses wrote, or Daniel or Jeremiah, is that what were they thinking? Now that's I believe the term is homiletics, if I'm not mistaken, where you have to translate even the Bible, interpret what you read by thinking back now, who wrote it, what were they thinking, what were they intending, now how do we translate it to get their intention? And certainly, once you write something, it exists by its own recognizance, of its own merit. If I wrote a book, like, I don't know what Frank Seekins was thinking when he wrote this. All I can see is, this book now speaks for itself. And Frank Seekins was doing the best he could in trying to get his mind on paper, but I have no idea what his mind was. All I have is this paper. It becomes its own entity. And now when I read it, I'm relating to what he wrote, and if he did a good job, it will accurately reflect what he intended. But there's no way for me to be in touch with what he intended. It's gone. It's only here on paper. Did he do a good job? Or did he say something which could be misconstrued? And for me to say, now, what was he thinking here? It's like, it doesn't matter what Frank Seekins was thinking. This now becomes something to provoke my thinking and my life experience. Frank Seekins may even be, well, like Charles Darwin. He said some stuff, and apparently at the end of his life on his deathbed, he recanted and refuted the whole thing. It's like, too late, it exists. You can claim it or not, Charles Darwin, but what you say about what you said no longer has any merit value. It now has taken on a life of its own, and if it steers the entire course of the world into apostasy, and you say, no, please, I really didn't mean it, I was wrong. It's like, shut up, it doesn't matter what you think anymore. It's taken on its own life. So the homiletical thing of going back and saying, well, what did they think, has some merit and value in terms of translation, but the more important thing is, what does it do to us now just because of what it is? Because all thoughts are fair game. Therefore, we have to be able to distinguish what thoughts are of value and what thoughts aren't. So it doesn't matter what they intended. To one hand, it doesn't matter what they hoped for. It doesn't matter what they even believed. So in addressing this, I can't tell you for sure that the writers, we've had this conversation. I'm going to hopefully present some things to you. Did Paul really think that when he wrote it? I don't know. Did Moses know that we were going to be saying this about what he wrote? I don't know. Did they see the same stuff we now see? I have no idea. Does it even matter? I don't know. The fact that I can see it and talk about it is the only thing that matters. Now here's an interesting thing that Ben brought up about the word key. My wife happened to, we were talking about key, and I believe that this is what the key unlocked, what is hopefully what I'm going to present here.
Are you talking about a physical key?
Yes. So, metaphorical and physical, but as a physical regard, she looked up the word key in the Strong's Concordance. Does anybody have a Strong's Concordance here? It'd be nice to make reference to an other word later, but I'll discuss the word key first of all. So she looked up in the Hebrew, under the definition of just simply the word key, not that we have to do it right now, that's
That's strong.
that's strong? Okay. Anyway, the word key in Hebrew means that which opens, unlocks, sets free, reveals. You go, yeah, that's what a key is. You look in the Greek under the definition of the word key, and it's that which locks, closes, imprisons, closes up. It's like, think about that. Why? They're both true, but why should that be? So in the Greek way of thinking, you go, key, that you get locked up by a key. Yes. Why didn't somebody say, well, that which either locks or unlocks? It's like, that may be more the English way, but yeah.
Eric, that harks back to the Greek mindset versus the Hebraic mindset. The
There you go.
Greek mindset is finite. They look at things in terms of limitation. Whereas, take the Parthenon, for example. The columns are deliberately skewed so they look straight. And that's the Greek aesthetic, and that's the way they look at life. As opposed to Hebrew or Jewish, where you're looking at possibilities. And Jewishness, if I may use that term, is glorious in its possibilities. It's a feast of possibilities, and that's the neat thing about it.
Think
And
about that.
That's
If
the
you're-
differentiation, in my own inimitable way, between the two.
That I hadn't heard it put that way, but that's wonderful. That's great. To think about the Hebraic mind, the Jewish way of thinking, is wide open, you might say unto eternity with possibilities. I mean, think about that. It's like, well, how big is the kingdom? How big is eternity? What are your limitations? I can do all things through Yeshua, who strengthens me. How many things? Where's your limitation? All things. How many things are possible with him? I mean, it's just wide open. It's like, well, so when we say, well, we want to know him, it's like, well, who is he? Well, he's the guy who's unlimited. And it's like, that's the start of that concept. But the depth of the concept is like, oh, with him in us, we also do all things. Can do all things. Well, where's the limitation? Our preference? Our belief? Yeshua said it was our belief, our faith, or perhaps our faithfulness, which was the limitation. So here's an interesting concept. You look up the word faith in Greek, and faith. Well, faith is the substance of things hoped for. Okay, so faith then is, you have a hope for this thing which you can imagine, you can picture, and then you hope unto that, and that's your faith. So I've heard it preached that you should have faith in your faith. And it's like, okay, so I should hope that that which I believe for is actually going to happen, and then cause my mind to grasp it, and then according to that faith, it'll be done unto me. And so you can hear sermon after sermon, and I'm not saying that's bad, but you can hear sermon after sermon about that thing, and you can wrestle with these concepts, and apparently that's a Greek thing to do. And again, that's not bad, because the Greek version is not a bad version. It's just an alternative perspective to the Hebrew. You could have the Hebrew perspective, say, of a key, which opens up, and it's like, yeah, but does that not look at the fact that a key also imprisons and locks up? What if you want to lock somebody up? A key is a valuable tool. So here's an interesting thing. I'm not saying Greek's bad and Hebrew's good. What I'm saying is that in the will of the Almighty, who has ordained and structured all things, he, remember, is the guy that scrambled the languages at Babel. And he then, you might say by his own design, had formed and crafted and placed in each one these different languages, and so they were, in a sense, ordained by him. We can't say they're bad, they're wrong, but he has a purpose and a functional use according to playing out his will and bringing forth righteousness, and I'll get to that in a moment, but the point of that is that they were of his design for a good reason. So therefore, when we look at the Greek and say, well, of what account this Greek then? Should we say, you know, to heck with the Greek, let's study the Hebrew, and it's like, bear all things in balance and in mind for the sake of understanding of his purposes. And so therefore, if he intended the Greek to run its course and have its day for his purposes to be accomplished, that's good, and there's something to be gained for that. And the thing to be gained is understanding his desire and understanding his purposes. If we understand his purposes regarding the Greek, then we can perhaps better value and appropriate his purposes in the Hebrew. And the benefit to that then, all this plays together in all these things, which is again, to know him, which is also better to be known by him. I mean, that's our preference, so that Yeshua has no reason to say, I don't know you. I mean, that's the reason for the whole thing, to say, well, we could sit there and say, hey, let me tell you about myself, Yeshua. Let me tell you who I am. I'm going to take today to go take a walk in the woods and just sit here and say, I'm going to introduce myself and say, is that what he means? If we're desperate for having fulfilled that verse to the point that we can't be held accountable for being one of those that he doesn't know, I mean, we ought to go to any desperate measure to make sure that he knows us. Well, so I was having this discussion with Leo. I don't know, you want to go there?
Go ahead. No, you have to. Actually.
I have to.
Yes.
I have to. The point is, okay, we're supposed to be the bride of Messiah. We're supposed to be the body of Messiah. How does the bride get known by the husband? Now, there's a phrase to know, which is yada. There's also another word in Hebrew, da'at, which is knowledge. But the word da'at is dalet, ayin, tav, go back to that later, is imparted knowledge. In other words, you can't know certain things unless it's simply, there's a couple times, which is a whole other story, but I've asked a question of the Almighty. Now, why should I ask that question? He has a structure of authority, of government, of rule, the way things work, which he has revealed to us, which is what this is all about, which is what this is. He said, this is the way the world is going to work because I made it, and this is the structure by which I made it. And if you understand this, you can work in harmony and congruency with it. If you don't understand it, you'll be bouncing off the walls not knowing why anything works. But here's one way it works. You ask so that you can receive. You don't ask, you don't receive. Now, if he wants to give you something, and I bumped into this in my own life experience, this is what I'm talking about. If he wants to give you something, he can't just say, hey, let me tell you about this. It doesn't work that way. You have to ask. You might say, I don't even know what to ask for. Well, if you don't know what to ask for, or don't have a hunch to ask him for something, you're not going to, because everything we do is predicated on an impulse to do, right? The inner desire, the manifestation, the doing. So, if he wants to give you an answer to something, he needs to first provoke the question. So if you might find yourself sometime having this thought that says, boy, I need to know something, but I don't know what it is I need to know. I feel like I need to find something out, but I have no idea what that is. I don't even know where to look or how to go about it. I would reckon that this is the Ruach, the Holy Spirit, him saying, I want to tell you something, but I can't until you ask me. So just ask me. Tell me what you want to tell me. Does it work that vaguely, or say, I don't even know what the question is, so please give me the question to ask. Stir up within me the question so I can ask you the question, and so he can give me the answer. And that's the way this seems to work. So there's this thing of imparted knowledge to Ott, where he has to simply, and I've had this experience where it almost like somebody just opened up your head and just dropped it in. There it is, like, what? How did I think of that? Well, I didn't. He imparted it. And this is, I believe, this whole thing is imparted to me. It's not that I figured this out or imparted. Imparted life is the letter Nun, by the way. That's what that means. It also, some people say that's a fish, and this is almost like the trail of a fish tail, like if a fish is sitting there in the water and you startle it and it whips its tail and cuts through the water, forming this pattern like a lightning bolt almost, just suddenly there, so, oh, that's this imparted life, that's da'at. But yada is experiential knowledge. So in the book of Genesis, where it said, and Adam knew Hua, his wife, otherwise known as Eve, this experiential knowing. And so you could sit there and say, well, how did he know his wife? Adam had to, you might say, get naked with Hua. Now there's an interesting word that we bumped into about a year ago. We were looking at the Hebrew letters, and I saw this place where, I believe is where it was the Almighty was talking to Moses, and he was talking about Abraham, and he says something about, and by my name, El Shaddai, did I make myself known. It's like, what is that word, did I make myself known? So just so you know how this works, does everybody know what an interlinear is? Interlinear Bible? Is there anybody that doesn't know what an interlinear is? Interlinear. You have no idea? Here's one. Just to show you. The interlinear Bible. Hebrew, Greek, and English. So you open up to a random page. This is written in Hebrew, English down here, and under each Hebrew word it tells you actually what that word means in English. And then there's a number on top, which happens to be, this one's keyed to Strong's, so the number on top of the word, you look up in a Strong's concordance, and it'll tell you the definition more fully like a dictionary played out. But here, so it says, and this is written in Hebrew, so it's going that way. If you look in the New Testament, it's Greek, and Greek is written like English, from left to right, Hebrew is right to left. So here, this is just 1 Samuel chapter 17. And gathered the Philistines their armies for battle, and were gathered at Soko, which to Judah, and they... So it doesn't read like English, but it's telling you literally the easiest definition that we have in English of each word. So then, in looking at that word, I noticed that the word that was translated, have I made myself known, is actually, if I can remember now, I'm just doing it off the top of my head, but it was Nun, Vav, Dalet, and then I believe it was Tav, Yod. You could say, well, that's just, it's like, how do you spell the word cat? C-A-T. Well, why is a cat spelled C-A-T? It's just a word. It doesn't matter how it's spelled. But in Hebrew, every letter of every word is very pertinent, very important. And if a word is spelled this way instead of that way, or there's an extra letter in, it's all for a reason.
Would you do that again? Just go through the letters.
I believe this is what they are. If I'm wrong, I'd have to look it up. But I believe it's Noon,
Vav,
Vav,
Dalet.
Dalet, Tav, Yod. I believe that's what it is. And this is what the word is. Noon is spelled with the phonetic of N, and a Vav has 4 different phonetic expressions. It's an O or a U, a V or a W. So it's Nu, and then the Dalet is a D, Da, and then the Tav is a T sound, T, and then ends with Yod, which is a E. Nudati.
Nudity.
Nudity. What? He has made himself known to Abraham. Nudity. It's like, so where do we come up with these English words? There's a lot of English words which come right out of the Hebrew. But we read this in the Bible and it says, oh, the Almighty made himself known to Abraham. How did he make himself known? It's like, did he show him his heart? Did he talk to him? Did he reveal the future? Did he reveal the Messiah? Did he talk with him? All those things. But in the Hebrew language, that's the English word nudity. And it's like he revealed himself. And so how does the wife get known by the husband? The husband reveals himself to the wife. So how then should we, the bride of Yeshua, when he says, I have never known you, he's got to reveal himself to us. It's not me necessarily walking around saying, well, let me tell you about myself. And it's him revealing himself to us. How does that happen? This is him revealing himself to us.
Correct.
The tabernacle is him revealing himself to us. The alphabet is him revealing himself to us. Yeshua is him revealed to us. The creation of the world, everything that exists, in some way, is him revealing himself to us. The Torah is him revealing himself to us. The Ruach, his breath, his different concept of what is this Ruach, this Holy Spirit. Is it the third person of the Trinity? I'm not going to answer the question like that because I'm trying to address this other way of thinking. So if you look up in the dictionary, the Strong's Concordance, or if you look at the meanings of the letters, this Ruach is actually like a wind, or his breath, or actually a journey, a path. So is the Ruach a person, or is it his path, his breath, his essence, his heart, which is the same thing which leads us into truth. That his breath in us gives us breath, which is our spirit. And how do you define the terms? Rather than trying to define the terms, which is, again goes back to a Greek way, I'm avoiding saying certain things for the sake of not telling you to do one thing and then forcing you to do another. I'm trying to leave it vague enough that you'll see something. This Ruach that leads us into truth, how do we even define that? Let's go back to the model of the atom, which is a nucleus with an electron floating around it. Maybe 1, maybe 20, maybe more. The point is this. When I was in high school, the model that they had for atoms was basically a circle in the middle, which was a neutron that had protons in it, but basically you have the nucleus, neutron and proton. And then you have this elliptical orbit where there was an electron. You could have up to 6 electrons per orbit. Then you had these various different orbits. In the standard designation of the atomic energy was a nucleus with 3 different elliptical orbits around it with electrons on it. And then many years later, and we had to remember, remember how many electrons represented which elements, and then the way that elements bond together had to do with how many electrons you could share in every orbit. And it's very structured and mathematical, you might say. But then they came up with this other concept which kind of blew that one away, but as a primitive, preliminary, you might say elementary way of conceiving the concept, that was fine. But the more appropriate way is that it's actually not an elliptical orbit by which this electron follows this path, but it's like this swarm of a cloud. So you could say, well, how do you have all these electrons in a swarm of a cloud? And then it gets into quantum physics where you can never, as it were, if you had a fast enough shutter speed, take a picture of this atom and find that here's that electron, and there's that electron, and there's that one. But these electrons are kind of like all over the place at the same time. And anytime you take a picture, the one electron might be in 5 different places. And like, oh, that defies our mind's grasp. But nevertheless, the concept of quantum physics is a proof of that type of thing. And to not go there other than to make it as a reference of a pictorial thing. Which is to say that the creation that the Creator has given us within its realm of being, whether it's physical matter or conceptual, it's a model for what really is the truth. And therefore, the Creator, in determining to make the creation, put within the creation everything He wanted us to know. If He wanted us to know something other than what was here, it would have already been here. The fact that we don't see it and don't have a mental grasp of comprehending and seeing means He didn't want us to know it. But then you might say, well, how big is what could have been? The Bible says that when we finally see Him face to face and we stand at the threshold of eternity, it'll be beyond anything that we've been able to grasp or imagine. The reality of what could be, what is so far beyond the finite grasp of our minds. We say, well, what can we grasp? This is what we could grasp. He determined to make this finite realm between Aleph and Tav, expressed in these 22 ways. That's what exists. What could have existed is beyond the Aleph and Tav, beyond, but it doesn't exist. Therefore, if we can think of quantum physics concepts, it's because He wanted us to be able to consider it. So He gave our minds the ability to grasp those concepts. He created nature in such an array that it expressed exactly what He wanted us to apprehend, to comprehend, to be able to look at that and make these metaphors, parables, which is why Yeshua talked in parables, talking about nature. He said, let me show you nature, what I did. Therefore, if we want to know about how do we relate, look at nature. If we want to know how the alphabet letters, nature's in here too. I mean, this is about a seed and the growth of a plant or an animal or a man or it's all in the alphabet. So what I'm saying is that in the creation was put everything He wanted us to deal with. And you could say, well, we shouldn't go certain places. Like, no, He created it. We can go there. We shouldn't let it be our God, but we can go wherever He made. You say, oh, well, what about spiritual forces and powers? And it's like, that has its place too. Not that we should be subservient to them, not that we should be scared of them, not that we should worship them, but we should know about them to the extent that He gave it revelation. So my point is, within the kingdom, we could sit there and say, well, how far is it okay to go? How far are you allowed to let your thoughts go? If He didn't want us to be able to at least grasp it, our minds couldn't grasp it. Now you could say, wait a second. What about the knowledge of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? He put it there and He says, don't go there. And it's like, if He says don't go there, fine. But He put it there. He put it there and said, now, regard my instructions. The tree was there for the sake of us regarding instructions. Now you sit there and say, we looked this up the other day, the tree of the knowledge, what word is that? Is that yada? Is that experiential knowledge? You're not supposed to experience this good and evil? The word was da'at. He says, I want to impart to you knowledge. If you go and you eat of this tree, which is the da'at of good and evil, you're now taking by your experience what I wanted to give you by impartation. You see that? They went to yada of knowledge of good and evil, and He said, I want to only give you da'at. That you went to take the da'at by your own yada. Understand that? So here, the fact you can understand that means that you're grasping a little of this about this Hebraic thing. Yes?
Eric, question. You've got orbits inside of orbits that you were talking about a minute ago.
Yes.
The question is, would you say that different Hebrew letters have different densities and different mass? And in combinations, they create words of more importance or maybe lesser importance?
That's what I was going to do with it. Thanks for bringing me back to that. Where I was going to go with the nucleus and the electrons. Think of the real meaning of each one of these letters as the nucleus. So if you were to say, well, just give me a simple definition of the letter. That's like trying to describe one electron and tell you where it is in the swarm. But, and this goes back to your question about how do you think about the pencil. I'm trying to show you how these work together exactly, which is to say, if I tell you what the letter noon means, and say, well, it's a quickening, a coming to life, an impartation. Well, I just use 3 words, not 1. Show you what Frank Seacon says, just to give you a reference. Noon, a fish. Okay, you want a simple explanation of that letter? That's a fish. Now, what does that do for you? It does more than nothing. It does do something. It gives you a reference that says that means something.
Makes
And,
me hungry.
Excuse me?
Makes me hungry.
Well, hungry for hopefully more of this stuff. But the point is, noon, a fish. And then he spells the word noon, which is actually spelled noon, vav, noon, because you remember it's the word noon, it's the letter noon, but that's spelled then with letters. So you have an N sound, a U sound, and an N sound. That's noon. So it's spelled N-U-N. And he says it also means to sprout or to spread. It also, the word neen, which is the same 3 letters with a different vowel, no, actually that's noon, vav, or noon, yod, noon, is neen, which means offspring or descent. And you go, wait a minute. If it's noon, why are we talking neen? And it's like, what Frank Seacon is showing here is that, well, here, I'll just read you a page out of what he says. The 14th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is called Nun. The ancient way this letter is drawn agrees with the meaning of the name of the letter. Nun in ancient Hebrew means fish. Now, for me to say, well, it doesn't mean fish, it does mean fish. It's ancient Hebrew. That's historical fact. I'm not trying to speak against it. The picture of a fish darting through water can be seen in the ancient symbols used for this character. The pictograph of a fish darting through water symbolizes action and life. Whoa, wait a second. Now we're looking at a whole nother level. Going back to what were they thinking. Now, if you were in ancient Hebrew and you saw this letter, are you thinking the sound of an N? Are you thinking fish? Or are you thinking what it represents, action or life? Well, I'm going to show you shortly a whole nother way to look at these letters, and I could show you a dozen different ways to look at these letters. And again, it's not for the sake of confusion or impression. It's only to show you. The goal here is to give you a grasp. I would maintain that we who are of Yeshua, we who are of the kingdom of heaven, we who are, that the hope of our calling is to be His bride unto the eternal dimensions of everything. This is our treasure. This is His gift to us to comprehend Him. This is His exposing Himself to us. Those who are not us cannot receive this. To them it's foolishness. They won't get it. They don't care to get it. They go, well, so what? I'm trying to say, this is Him. This is so valuable and so precious. If I can just show you a little bit of what I see so that you regard Him, that's all this is. This isn't about knowledge for you to gain, to say, oh yeah, I got one of those, I'll stick it on the shelf. This is more seeing and being. This is essence. This isn't stuff. Anyway. When the Jewish nation went into Babylonian captivity, they began using the Aramaic shape of the letters. Although the spelling of the words remained the same, the shape that showed the pictorial meaning was lost. And then this is what a good thing that Frank Seacon does, and just to show you and give him credit here, son is spelled bet nu. Well, bet means house. He goes through that in the beginning of the book. So the word picture says that the son is the life of the house, or the life of the family. So he goes on every letter like that. And then he goes on saying in Psalm 119, does anybody know how Psalm 119 was formulated, where every group of 8 or 7,
8 verses.
every group of 8 follows the alphabet? Does everybody know about that? You don't know about that. Okay, this is Psalm 119 is the only chapter like this in the whole Bible. And you don't get it in English, but it's Hebrew poetry And in some English Bibles, they'll show you where the first group of 8 letters starts with Aleph, and every word, the first letter of that word, starts with an Aleph. And then the second group of 8 has a subtitle Bet over it, and every letter starts with the letter Bet. And the third group, Gimel, and it goes through all the way Aleph through Tav. That's Psalm 119. That's why it's such a long chapter, psalm in the Bible, because it's 8 verses of every one of the 22 letters. Thereby qualifying the significance of the Hebrew, you might say. Anyway, so the point is about this, about the nucleus and the swarm of electrons. If you look at every real letter, if we could know the truth, the meaning of the letter that the Almighty has when He determined the letter, if that's the nucleus, then every aspect of our explanation of that letter is like one of the electrons. If I say it's a fish, that's one of the electrons. If I say it's life, that's one of the electrons. If I say it's action, that's electron. If I say it's a quickening or an impartation or the concept of life imparted so that you grow up and put out branches and put out roots, those are a few more electrons. And so when you think of the letter, if you can't see the neutron in the middle because of the swarm of the electrons on the outside, and the swarm of the electrons are always moving, it's not like I said, well, there's one and there's one if you take a photograph, but they're always a swarm all around. So that's hopefully a metaphor for saying how should we regard the letters. And if you can actually regard the meanings of each one of these letters by the swarm of the electrons around them, by the constantly moving swarm of definitions regarding what they are, you'll have a much better grasp at the meaning of the letters. But then let me take a step back from that and show you the gospel in the letters, so you'll have a different regard.
Yes.
And when I first saw this, now let me back up a bit. Moses was shown the tabernacle, okay, in the heavenly realm. One of the times when Moses went up there to Mount Sinai, it says that he was shown the model. He was shown the tabernacle existing in heaven. And then the Almighty said to Moses, see to it that you make it exactly like that. And so then he comes back down, and there's many chapters written, I think it's around Exodus 25, where he makes all the pieces of the tabernacle, which are these pieces, according to certain weights, measures, everything. And I'm not even getting into all that. I'm just simply looking at the objects themselves. The weights and measures and sizes and connections are a whole other study which others have done. Real quick, though, speaking of others, I mentioned Frank Seekins. There's also Lou White, who I've got a lot of good perspective from. There's Monty Judah. There's Avi Ben Mordecai. There's Michael Rood. Brad Scott. And Rico Cortez has some. Jeff Benner. I've not encountered Jeff Benner's stuff myself. Oh, Leo has it. He's on the internet. Where is he found? On the
Ancient Hebrew.
AncientHebrew.com or .org or something. Anyway, so Jeff Benner himself has looked into some of the same stuff that we're talking about, though differently. I have yet to find anybody who has actually discussed the things that I'm about to discuss. I've made mention of Frank Seekins because that's where it started. Jeff Benner is talking about some aspects. Brad Scott is talking about some aspects. And if I took this time to reiterate what Brad Scott has said, he says it better. Get his tapes, download his stuff off the internet. It's great. He has a series called Words Mean Things, and he'll do basically what Frank Seekins is doing, is saying, hey, Bet Noon, the life of the house is the Son. Who is Yeshua? He's the life of the house of the Almighty, and so forth and so on. And every word that exists, you can look at it that way. But we're going to go beyond that even some more. Anyway, Moses was showed the tabernacle, and he showed, make it exactly like this. Now, reasonably then, you have to say, when was that tabernacle in heaven made? Well, according to Genesis, 1st chapter, the heavens and the earth were made the first week. Now that means either he's talking about the sky and the stars, or he was saying even the stuff that we think of as present existence in the beyond, the third heaven, you might say, was also created that same week. And think it might be Brad Scott, but somebody actually suggests that because of that, then even the angels that we know of were made in the first week, and that means it wasn't the matter of Lucifer rebelling and falling and this whole event in heaven and getting kicked out.
It's Hovine who does that.
Ken Hovine says that. He suggests that had to happen after the creation of the world. Because in that first week, on the first Sabbath day, the Almighty says, it's good. It's all good. And he rested. Therefore, according to Ken Hovine, the fall of Lucifer had to happen after the creation was finished. Now, if Lucifer came down, no longer to be called Lucifer, but Satan, and his name was like, oh, Satan, this big, great, he's the pipsqueak. But the point is, his name isn't Satan. In Hebrew, it's Ha-Shatan. And the word Shatan means adversary. So for people to say his name is Satan, it's like, no, he's the adversary. He's the adversary. We don't have his name. He used to be called, well now Lucy, L-U-C is a Greek word, I believe, meaning light, or luck, or fortune, which is, oh, this bright. And so he certainly was this preeminent angel. But for people to call him, Satan, it's like, not even. He's the adversary. He's the one who brings adversity. So we only have, again, a reference of his job description, not even of his name, nor should we even think to be what... I don't even see it worthwhile my mind going there. What might his name be? It's like, it doesn't even matter. He's just of no regard, other than the fact that he's the one who provides us opportunities to see the salvation of Yahweh. If we had no adversity, we wouldn't need to be saved out of it. So thanks be to the orchestration of all things, where he provides us the occasion for one stirring up the adversity, so that we could run to him who is our strength and be saved and redeemed. But the point is, that would have happened after the first week of creation. So when we think of, well, what was happening then in the eternal realm before the creation of the world? Our minds go there, though we can't fathom it. And what's going to happen after, in the by and by, after this world's period of time comes to an end? And if this world's period of time is only 6,000 years to now, there's a reckoning on the Jewish calendar, the reckoning of the scribes of all, that this is, I think here was it 5,766 or something. But then there was there's a question, a disparity of 240-year gap that the scribes during the time of the Medo-Persian realm that they missed somehow, which would actually bring this up to the year 6006 right now, which coincidentally happens to correspond to the fact that we're 2006 from AD 0 when Yeshua was born, plus or minus a couple years. So the point is, of the reckoning of time, this might be only 6,000 years. Well, then what about the Egyptian pyramids at 10,000, 15,000 years? Or does anybody know who Francis Schaeffer is?
Yes.
Yeah, now he was regarded, I just was reading a bit of a book about him, he was regarded as one of the premier intellectuals of all times, especially of our time. And I read this book where he said, well, this notion of there being only 6,000 years is rather ludicrous, because there's some gaps in the genealogies, and so therefore it's like you're talking about the grandfather and then the great-grandson, and there's this big gap in between, but it's just hitting the highlights of the paternal record, and it's like, we might have been around 15,000 years, according to him, and it's like, all right, what do you do with that? There's no way that me or anybody else can sit there and definitively say, this is how many years. But this is the model we were given. We were given the tabernacle. What do we do with that? So anything I'm saying is simply to show you, you might say what I see is the value of what we were handed. I'm not trying to argue with any other intellectuals or archaeologists or theologians or anything else. There's plenty of people that could spend their lives doing that. I'm not trying to do that. I'm just simply trying to show you what I see as a valuable thing here. So, Moses was shown this tabernacle. The question is, when was the tabernacle built? Was that tabernacle built as part of the first week of creation? Or did it exist before the first week of creation? It certainly didn't exist after the first week. In other words, the Almighty didn't sit there and make the heavens and the earth and complete them, and then after a few thousand years of life on earth, he goes, we forgot to make something. And they make this tabernacle in heaven, and then Moses comes up and he says, hey Moses, look what I just made. It would have had to pre-exist. And I can prove that by another line of reasoning. The tabernacle in these objects, there's a big white fence with a 4-colored door. There's an altar of sacrifice. There's a bronze laver. And then in the set-apart place, you got the menorah, the table of showbread, the altar of incense, and they're formed like this. You know, this on one side, that on one side, that up there. And then in the set-apart place, you've got the Ark of the Covenant. Well, look at the days of creation. The first day, he said, let there be light, and he separated light from the darkness. The big white fence of the tabernacle in the wilderness was exactly that. Here in the wilderness, in the darkness, you've got this big fence. Now, above the set-apart place, if you're looking at an aerial view, say here, and I'll explain this in a moment, above that, you've got this cloud, this what people call the Shekinah glory cloud, the pillar of fire glowing. And this pillar of fire would radiate its light through the big white fence, which was made out of white linen, and this white linen fence would be glowing in the middle of this dark wilderness. And it separates light, you might say the realm or the kingdom of light, from within to the desert wasteland outside. It's this set apart, almost like when John saw the vision in the book of Revelation of the New Jerusalem coming down. It's like, wow, it was gleaming and glistening, and all these gems. And you might say that that's the appearance of this big white fence of this Mishkan in the middle of the wilderness was just that stark. Separating light from darkness. That's like day one. The next day, the Almighty separated the waters from the waters. Waters above from the waters below. What happens at this altar of sacrifice? Now, you can't even get into the tabernacle, according to the law, if you were in contact with the dead. Nobody unclean could come into the tabernacle. So there was a place of cleansing so you could come in, and it was outside, and it was known as the place of the red heifer sacrifice. Rico Cortez does a good job discussing the red heifer sacrifice. Yeshua was lifted up on a stake or a cross, but he was crucified outside the gates of the city, outside the temple, just like the red heifer sacrifice was outside. The red heifer sacrifice had a function. Anybody in contact with the dead were unclean, ritually, ceremonially, and they came to the priest, and the priest took the ashes of the red heifer and put them on this person, thus cleansing them so that they could enter into the tabernacle. So I see this as a type of saying, we who are dead, who are in contact with the dead, who are in the world, by the blood of Yeshua, have been granted permission to enter the kingdom. So I see then the big white fence is symbolic of the kingdom of heaven on earth. Now, Yeshua said, behold, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. And John the Baptist said that. Yeshua told his disciples to go out and say, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Why should it be at hand? Where's this kingdom? What is the kingdom of heaven? We can go on with a whole thought about that. Why should you say, if the kingdom of heaven is yet to come, and Yeshua said it's at hand, where is it? What is it? How would one define it? And we could say, well, what's our regard to the kingdom of heaven? It's like, well, if we're members of the kingdom of heaven, we could say, well, now we're members, and it's like, well, so what? It gets back to so what? Of what regard is the kingdom of heaven? Why should Yeshua make such a big deal about the kingdom of heaven being at hand? Well, this picture in the alphabet, and why I'm starting with the Mishkan is I'm showing you what I saw in the alphabet. The only reason I have any reason to say anything about the alphabet is because, or the alphabet, is because I saw the Mishkan in it. So I'm showing you how this is described by this. Picture this white is the realm of light, the eternity before the creation, beyond the creation. In the Hebrew mindset, there's a phrase, Ein Sof. Has anybody heard that or not heard that? Ein Sof means without limit. Now this word Ein, A-I-N, you might say is the English way to spell it. Ein, that sounds foreign. Ein. Well, we have a word, ain't. It means, I got nothing to do with it. Well, Ein, A-I-N, with a tav, the tav is the sign of the covenant, without covenant is the meaning of the Hebrew word ain't. I got no agreement. I ain't going there. So this word ain't in English is actually, I see this as being a Hebraic concept. So the purpose is to say that Ein Sof, the one without limit, whose realm is the realm of pure light, you might say, Yeshua being that light, it's a reference of that light. And when he said, let there be light, that was before he created the sun, moon, and stars on day 4. And so what was that light? Well, that was the light of Aor, and we'll get to that in a minute. the way to spell light in Hebrew is, writing in Paleo, is Aleph, Vav, Resh. And interestingly enough, it's just like, I'll get it, excuse me, Resh, not that, Aleph, Vav, Resh. I'll get into the meaning of that in a minute, but the word for it, and he said, let there be, is actually, if I'm remembering correctly, isn't that right? Omer? Let there be light?
Wait a minute, it's Viomer, wasn't it?
Viomer. And the word Viomer, is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
Va'omer. Now, just so you know, the letter Vav in the beginning means and it's Brad Scott was talking about this. It's a typical Hebraic way to speak, is to say and this and then that and that. And so whenever you see something written in the New Testament where it's and, that's a clue that it wasn't originally written in Greek, because the Greeks don't speak like that. It was probably written in Hebrew, or Paul, knowing Greek, still had a Hebrew mind and was speaking Hebraically, though he was writing in Greek. But it's a Hebrew thing to say and this, and this, and this, almost like a run-on concept.
Yes.
Yeah. I thought you said something. Anyway, so the poor person, look at this for a minute. Let me say, yeah.
Could you use a darker
Sure.
marker, please?
Using invisible ink.
This is, I believe this is, and if I'm wrong, in terms of one of these spelling, I'm doing this off the top of my head, so I'd love to be standing corrected, and the only way to do that is look back at the scriptures, so I'm trying to run along here and not spend the time to do that. So it says, and he said, in fact, let me just look that up, in terms of the Tanakh, and he said, it's Genesis, which is Bereshit, chapter 1. It's easy enough to regard. Now the nice thing, just so you know, if anybody wants to do this, when Brad Scott was here, he was encouraging people to buy books and to use them. And I'm trying to do the same thing. If I'm trying to show you this stuff, it'll only take you so far. You actually have to do this. It's like somebody trying to tell you, oh, it's so great to go take a walk in that park and smell those blossoms that are in bloom right now. You just got to go do it. You go, oh, I hear that and I believe that, but if you don't do it, you're not going to experience it. And Brad Scott said, 20 minutes? Okay, Brad Scott was saying that of all the people he talked to, maybe 5% would ever pick up a book and do this stuff. And so what I'm suggesting is that whatever I'm trying to show you here is to encourage you to say, when I first got a couple of these books, it's like, oh, gosh, what am I supposed to do with this, you know? And once I started doing it, it's like, it just starts rolling. It's like a snowball, where it's a lot easier than it looks, but the hard thing is the motivation to get up and start doing something. But here, so this Tanakh is the Tanakh is basically the Jewish Old Testament. The printing of these letters is easy to read. This interlinear is absolutely horrible to read. The only benefit of that is it tells you which word is translated into which English word. But they've completely blurred the letters, and you can't even with a magnifying glass, you can't make out what the appropriate letters are. So the only thing I can do is read in English where it says, and he said, let there be light. It's like, what word is let there be? So I look here, and I realize what letter it is, because here they have the English on one side and the Hebrew on the other side. So I can look here and said, verse 3, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. Well, the question is, what does it say in Hebrew? Does it say, and God said, let there be light? So knowing that this is a Gimel, third letter, verse 3, I look over here on the side, and there's a Gimel. Now, where there's a colon in the Tanakh, that's where they separate between one verse and the next. So the word for and God said was
Viomer, isn't it?
yeah,
It should be
there's a
Yod.
yod.
Yeah, it has to be Yod. You put it in and you erase it and kind of.
See, you can't even trust my own thinking. I can't remember all this stuff. You have to. you have to look back to the scriptures every time, because, I mean, apparently what the scribes do that write in the Torah scrolls is that they're not allowed to read a word and then copy it, I know what the next word is. They have to sit there and force themselves
Letter by letter.
letter by letter. And I myself have found myself, you know, sometimes trying to write these notes, run ahead, missing a word, missing a letter, missing a line. It's like, gosh, everything is very precise for a reason. And if we regard it with that precision, it's not a matter of distance, it's a matter of thoroughness.
Amen.
You could sit there and say, well, what does that mean? That means, and God said, let there be light. So, Vayomer Elohim, well, the word Elohim is God, translated, I'll show you that in a minute. Ye, or. And the word or is Aleph, Vav, Resh. Ve, ye, or. And now, somebody who knows Hebrew might just cringe at the sound of my Hebrew words, but I'm trying to speak so that our ears can understand.
Vayomer Elohim.
Vayomer Elohim.
Vayomer Elohim. Yehi or va yehi or.
And when he said, let there be, he said this.
Oh, yeah.
Yod, Hey, Yod. And God said, this is a Y, kind of a Y sound. This is kind of an H sound, and this is another Y sound. So in reading right to left, Yehi, or Yehi, and this is like this is an Aleph which has like no sound. It's a vowel, but it's really not pronounced. But it's kind of like it blends into the next one. And remember, this is a Vav, so it can be pronounced as a O, U, V, or W. So that's O and R.
You're right. That's good.
So it's kind of like Aor. Vayomer Elohim, Yehi or, Ve, Yehi or. So there's no past tense in the sense of saying, and God said, let there be light, and there was light. In Hebrew, that's not what it says. It says, Aor, which is to say light, Yehi, and light Yehi. It's almost like light be and light be. This word for be. So I could sit there and say, well, does that mean let there be? Or allow there be? Or simply be? Or how do I give my English brain the understanding of what he said when he said, Yehi or? And what is this or? What is this light? I believe
Eric, doesn't this tie back into your pencil example of the pencil in the Hebraic is the action that it's used for, and in the Greek it is the object. Here you're talking about an existence rather than an event.
yes. But the event allowed the existence. The event when it didn't exist before and he said, be. There it was. So that wasn't an event. But I'm going to show you a little bit beyond
Right.
that cause in a second here.
So Eric,
Yes.
you're looking at the precursor to is.
Excuse me?
You're looking at the precursor to is.
Yes.
Because it exists already. Not to be, because it's already there. Did it?
Let me qualify that though. No, I'm not saying it's not already there, but here, let me go to Isaiah 14:24. And I know this may sound like I'm bouncing all over the place, but I'm trying to establish a firm base here by which everything else can be launched from. So this is really critical. Now, let me show you something in Isaiah 14:24 that if you don't know the meanings of the letters, you'd never see this in a million years. You just wouldn't see it. Yahweh, well, here, it says in this Tanakh, Hashem, master of legions. It's like, who's that? Well, Hashem in Hebrew means the name. The letter He, which is this letter, just like I said, the letter Vav means and, which it does, among other things, but it's a conjunction. It also represents a nail or a hook or that which holds things together, like a bridge. And you can almost see this bridge in the Paleo like this. It's holding things. And it also means a man, or the embodiment. And a man, what is a man? A man is the one who's supposed to be the bridge between the Almighty and the face of the earth. The one who nails the covenant to the earth is the man. And Yeshua is the one who nailed the promises of the Almighty to us. And so, again, this gets into this concept. But the hey means the. It's like pointing, the direct object. If you were in the, like a planetarium and you got this laser pencil and you say, well, that constellation, well, which one? And it shines the laser light. That pointing, that revelation, that like shining a light on something is what the hey means. As a matter of fact, that's the, this Paleo hey is the symbol for wind that weather people use now on their weather charts. It's the symbol for wind. And it's almost like, well, what wind? Well, like the Ruach wind, the path wind, the designated journey, which is to say specific as opposed to non-specific. It's that which hey means. It's the revelation like a window. And this word for hey is like window. There's another way to look at a hey. Is I've seen these ads on modern advertisements selling medicines, respiratory medicines. You see this cross view of a guy looking sideways showing his respiratory tract and up coming through his mouth. And so this wind passage is almost like the look of this hay, you know, the throat coming out of the mouth, and so the wind passage thing. So anyway, Ha-Shem means the name. So the Jewish thing is to not speak his name. Hence we get the Lord. It's not speaking his name. Or God doesn't speak his name. The Jews don't call him God, they call him Elohim, which means mighty ones, and we'll get into that. It's a whole other thing. But the point is this: what do these letters mean? So on the one hand, you have the Yod. I'm trying to show you something here. The Yod is a hand that works. Excuse me?
Did we lose Isaiah?
Yeah, well, yeah, let's go back to Isaiah. Isaiah 14:24. Hashem, or Yahweh, master of legions, which is to say Elohim Tsevaot. The Elohim, the mighty one, Tsevaot, is of hosts, or of legions, has sworn. Now this is him speaking. This is the Almighty himself speaking regarding himself. Surely, as I have conceived, so shall come about. As I have devised, so shall be established. In the Scriptures version, it says, as I have planned, so it shall be. As I have purposed, so it shall rise. And I was reading this one day and I thought, that's Aleph Tav. Aleph Tav. Every legal matter is established in the mouth of two witnesses. And he's saying here, Aleph is his plan, is his purpose, is what he conceived and what he devised. Aleph. So if you read St. Frank Seekins, he'll say, well, Alex is an off. Aleph is an ox.
Okay, it's time to take a break.
Okay, a couple more. Aleph is an ox. But others will tell you, if you look at Lou White's, the back of his book, he'll say it means strong, or it means first, or it means master. The things an ox represents. Picture those as the electrons around the nucleus. The nucleus is the real Aleph. What's the real Aleph? His plan. His plan, his purpose, his design is the Aleph. Okay. His plan is going to be played out, and it will be accomplished as he planned. Aleph Tav. Who is Yeshua? I'm the Aleph and Tav, he said. I am the plan accomplished. What he said from the beginning will surely happen, without question, just like he planned. Yeshua is the embodiment of the plan, which is the whole thing. When I saw that, I realized he is saying this with definitive clarity, saying, it's like, how many years, how many eons did he plan? Did he do it in an instant, or did he take eons of time? But he came up with a plan. He devised it, he calculated it, he purposed it, he orchestrated it, he put the whole thing together. Okay, that's it. The architect, the Aleph, implies the behavior of the architect. It doesn't mean the architect, though it does mean that. It's the one who did the architect designing, but it also speaks of the plan, but it also speaks of everything that went into the formulation of the plan, which he uses the words devise and purpose and plan and arrange and orchestrate and then cause it to be. There's a word for truth, the word for truth, which is spelled Aleph, Mem, Tav. So you've got the plan and the accomplishment of the plan, Aleph, Tav. What's in the middle? Mem. Well, Mem happens to mean water, or chaos, or chaotic waters, or birth, or brought forth, or people, or many. This letter Mem means all these things. So the bringing forth of people in turbulent chaos, which is the embodiment of the whole plan from the purpose to its accomplishment, is the truth. We're talking about the truth. Yeshua says, I'm the truth. This is the truth. This is the plan laid out here, which I'll show you as the gospel just before we break. And you'll see that it's no mistake why the word truth is spelled emet. Aleph, Mem, Tav. So here you have the yod is this hand that works. It's like shaped like this, where it's grasping a tool or causing something to exist. So this letter yod is a working hand which causes things to exist, to make things. You got a hey, which is revealing as light or pointing at, and then you have this yod again making things. Well, when you make something, you claim it as yours. You're the artist, you sign your name, he says, I made it, I revealed it, and it's mine. That's what this means. I made it, I revealed it, and it's mine. Or, the plan connected to, or nailed, or attached to, or bridged by the Resh, which is the Messiah. I'll explain that in a second. So here, what is this light that he said, be? He made it, he designated it, revealed it, and claimed it as his, that the plan would be nailed by or connected by the Messiah. And this is not just connected to, but it also is the man. And you might say, well, the Messiah, it was prophesied to be of two sorts. Messiah ben Joseph, Messiah ben David. Joseph, the suffering servant, ben David, the exalted king. So Messiah is going to have two manifestations. So here you have the light is the plan revealed in both, in Messiah, who is both, ben Joseph, ben David. The first appearing of Yeshua, the second appearing of Yeshua. That's the light. And when he said, I made it, I'm revealing it, and I'm claiming it. And he simply, when he said, let there be this light, the Almighty, Yod He Vav He, the Creator, took his plan and he exposed or birthed or revealed, brought forth Messiah. When he said, let there be, he exposed the Messiah. Now this goes back to, how does a husband know a wife? He exposes himself. Nudity. He exposed Messiah and there was light.
Yes.
You understand?
Yeah, that's awesome.
There's a rabbinic teaching that says that the first radiation of a flame is this light. So he says, let there be light, and that there's these three elements of light in the universe. There's this light by which we see, by which we walk, or the daylight, but there's an intellectual ascent, like, the light bulb goes on, you have an idea, and yet there's a third light, which is a spiritual luminosity, and says that these letters, even if you gaze on them and you have no comprehension of what these letters mean or how they're represented, it says these letters are flames of fire, that these letters literally illuminate, and that there's great spiritual luminosity if you will just look at them and begin to work with them and begin to open that up. And the other one was the idea of in the beginning, where he says,
I was just going to go to the Bereshit.
Okay.
Yeah.
The word nudity, we're talking about different levels of, could be a physical nudity, or knowing as communication, unveiling of what you know, and being going on, continuing to know as you reveal your person
Right.
to another person, right?
Right. Yeah, Dieter?
5 minutes.
5 minutes. Okay, let me show you two things real fast. Then before that, playing off the word Bereshit. Now remember this. I'm going to raise
too
it.
fast.
Okay. Sorry, I can't do that. I'm not going to do that.
Light the fuse.
Now here, when he said, let there be light. But the word said, Yamer. The word for say is revealing the Messiah. Now why would that cause light? Let me show you this. The first word in the scripture is Bereshit. And it's spelled Bet, Resh, Aleph, Shin, Yod, Tav. Now I'll go through the meanings of the words right after this, but just to show you the significance of this. The Bet not only means house, but it means inn. So what's the difference between whether you have a house or not? The easiest way to picture this is like if you were out in the desert and everything was just out in the blazing sun, you set up an umbrella. Now you're either under the shade of the umbrella or not. You're either in the umbrella or you're not. You're either in the house or you're out. So the concept of inn, or the concept of house, is not just the structure, but it's what it implies. It implies that you're part of as opposed to not being part of. That you're in the Father's heart, not in the Father's heart. In the kingdom, not in the kingdom. It's this in. So Resh is the Messiah, the exalted man. I'll show you that in a minute. So you could say Messiah here. Now Aleph is the plan, and you could say, well, that's the first also. Because remember, the concept of the plan or the purpose of the design is one of the electrons. But the other electron, you might say floating around, is the word first, or master, or strong, or preeminent, or from beyond the realm of eternity. Because remember, if the architect says, I'm going to draw a plan, that implies that there was a day before he devised the plan. So the Aleph represents that there was something beyond when there was first established a plan. And everything this side of the Aleph, which is the Bet, is the plan. All we have reference of from our scheme of things is the Bet side of the Aleph. The other side of the Aleph is the eternal realm, from beyond eternity, past, you could say. And what we have is this eternal realm of the Bet until he calls it done. Well, Tav is where he calls it done, but to show you how this plays out, this white section is the kingdom of heaven beyond the physical manifestation. The black, which is to say the Ein Sof, the one who is without limit, created a shield of darkness, separating himself from those who are in the material creation to the one who is beyond. In the material creation there was limit. Beyond the material realm of darkness there was no limit. So to tie all this in together right before the end, the Ein Sof in the white light realm of his being created a shield, a realm of darkness. And within that darkness, Yeshua said, here is the kingdom of heaven at hand, on the face of the earth, which is what this is all about. And then when he comes back and tears away the veil of this darkness, revealing the truth, the Ein Sof, the infinite realm again, it'll be back to the realm of the light, but the realm of light that we have access to, which is our treasure, which is in Yeshua, which he's given us, is the kingdom of heaven, which is what this is all about, that we have access to right now. So in Messiah, then first, which is also the strength, or the strength of what he made, the plan, which is also the covenant, which we'll get into, must be after the break. Shin happens to be the monogram symbol of El Shaddai, the nurturing one, the all-consuming fire. And why should it be the Shin? The essence of fire, but it's also, you can say, well, what is this essence of fire? Is it the fire? No, that's the Greek way of thinking. Yes, it's that, but it's also teeth. Frank Seekins will tell you it's like this consuming, this teeth, this eating thing. It's the heart, the inner flame, the inner heart of somebody is their essence. And I'll show you how that plays into the name of Yeshua in the next time. So in Messiah, El Shaddai then, which is the consuming fire, the nurturing one, the one who revealed himself to Abraham as the Almighty, Yod, created or established or caused to be. You could say then established. And then Tav is the covenant. The Tav is a mark or sign, designates the plan, the covenant, the people of the covenant, the cross, the covenant. So here, Bereshit. In Messiah first, El Shaddai established the covenant. In Messiah, he established the covenant. So when Yeshua says, I am the Aleph Tav, and I will get to this where he said, he is the whole covenant. This is the covenant. So who is this Messiah that we say we believe in? Here you have, I saw this one day, I was talking to somebody else. There was a milk jug, and the handle was part of the jug. The fluid was in the handle as well as in the jug. You know, you've seen this hollow handle milk jug. Okay, I saw this as being a picture of the Almighty. In that, well, you could say, well, Yod He Vav He, he's like this jug, but he's given us a handle. And it's the same fluid, the same air within the handle as within him. But the handle is that part of himself that he caused to be that we could grasp. You can't say the handle's not him, or him, he's not the handle, or is he the jug? Is the Father of the jug and the handle the Messiah? Or it's like they're all the same guy. But he's given us the Messiah by which to grasp him. And then he gave us a hand that could grasp that handle. In other words, whatever we can grasp, he caused us to be by design to grasp what he wanted to be grasped, which is the Messiah. Therefore, he put into Messiah the covenant. And then, Al-Mer, he exposed Messiah, and everything caused to be, because everything is a manifestation of the covenant. Do you understand that? He took his plan, and he caused the plan to be who the Messiah is, the plan. And then so he planned and he purposed, and he says, okay, what part of me am I going to show to the world? That'll be called the Messiah. And so he put the plan for us and the universe and everything that exists in his relationship to us unto the eternal scope. And he put all that into the Messiah, and then he simply showed the Messiah, which sounded like a word, which caused everything to be that is. You see that? And that's simply what the letters are saying. So then you could say, well, what is this Aleph that he put into the Resh, which is the covenant? Well, that's Yeshua. And I'll end with this. So the plan from the beginning, the Father, the Creator, the one who causes all things to be, came up with a plan and put it into being. A house, a structure, a body, a word. What is his relationship between the two? Well, he'd go in between the two. He'd relate to it. That's Gimel, like a camel, back and forth. Transportational access, like Jacob's ladder. He wouldn't stand aloof, he would engage. How would he do that? He would be the door. He would cause there to be access to him. He wouldn't remain disparate and separate, but he would cause there to be association. And he would be himself that door. He would be the Creator, the Aleph, the one who designed the plan. He would also be the Bet. He would be... Each one of these letters is not only what he's doing, what the plan is, but it is also a revelation of he himself. And like I said, there's 1,000 ways that I could go through what each of these letters mean and show you a different story every time, because it's the meaning of all things. So I'm trying to give you just one brief overview. This door he would reveal as light. And he would reveal himself as the door of light by becoming a man to be the bridge. And when he became a man, he would be hung up on a cross and cut off. This is a weapon, that which is cut off, separated from. He'd be cut off from the land of the living. He'd be raised up and slaughtered. So that we could get access to the kingdom of light. Het is the letter for a fence, so that we could come into the fence. And so be sealed, stamped, called his. Then he would show us who he is. Then he would reveal the Creator. Then he would do that by also, you might say this is like a wheel, like a potter's wheel. He would take us who have come in as a piece of clay and put us on the potter's wheel and start it spinning, so that he would start working us to be conformed to his image. Yod, Tet, Yod. And he would do that by first showing us the instructions. This is an open hand. It's a gift. It's a covering. It's a filter. At the place of the altar of sacrifice, as I started to mention before, they slaughtered the animals. They separated pieces. They'd separate the skin. They'd separate the blood. They'd separate the guts. They'd separate the dung. They'd separate the meat pieces. It's a place of separation, like separating waters from waters. Regarded then as authority, not arbitrary, but regarding him as authority to appropriate his instructions gives us authority, so that we could be born of him, cleansed, mem, water, birth, bring forth, baptism, and then equipped and imparted life to, imparted the stuff of life. We would come to him dead. By his blood, he gives entrance and cleanses us from all sins so that we can be part of the kingdom, so that he will then form us to be conformed to his image according to his ways, and give us birth as adopted children into his family, equal with those that are born of his family. Impart and equip us with the stuff of life to live, to do his calling, which is what? Micah 6:8. He's shown you, O man, what is good and what Elohim requires of you. Do justly, love mercy, walk humbly with your God. Do justly, like a menorah filled with the oil to burn light. We are to be filled with the Holy Spirit to put forth the light of his kingdom. Like the shofar, this lines up with the festivals also, Yom Teruah, the day of blowing of trumpets. Shofar is filled with his breath. We are to be filled with the Ruach, his spirit, to proclaim his ways. Do justly, love mercy, judgment and balance, mercy and kindness and grace and equitable dealings. Walking humbly with him, this letter Pei is, this psalmic is like a watchtower, it's like a grape arbor, it's like a power pole, it's like a trellis, it's all these different things. The ayin, of course, we talked about being the eye and the fountain and the depth of the soul. The Pei is a mouth. It's speaking, it's fellowship, it's prayers, it's the mind of Yeshua giving us reason and understanding. Zadok, the model of what this is played out to be. So here he equips us to do this, to be a good steward, and then he'll judge us as to how we did it, and he'll talk about it and help us walk through the way according to this standard of righteousness, this model, which is Yeshua, which is the Zadok, which is the scepter, you might say, which is also a fishhook. So this is where we live our life as believers in this realm. And then this kuf is like this, the pillar of fire, which is an overview, which is the back of the head. We'll go into this more later. When he showed Moses who he was, he showed him the back of his head, put him in the cleft of the rock. This letter literally means the back of the head, but it's also like this mushroom shape where it goes up and spreads out over, so you get to see this overview like a helicopter view. This is the earthly realm. He became a man who rise up from the surface of the earth. This is where our life is played out. This letter means after this. What happens after this? After what? After these 7 days. We talk about 6,000 years. How many years is it? Really 10, 15,000? 7,000 years perhaps is some. There's 7 objects in the tabernacle. 7,000 years perhaps. The 8th means new beginning. Messiah comes back. The Resh. The Messiah comes back. He shows us his face. Now we can only see the back of his head, what he showed to Moses. We can see Messiah ben Joseph, but when he comes back, we'll see Messiah ben David. He'll show us his face. Sheen. He'll destroy all this. He said he'll come back as a consuming fire and burn this place up. Tav, and accomplish the covenant just as he said. So here's a prophecy of the gospel. The Creator gave us his Son, who came down to give us access to the kingdom and reveal the kingdom of light. He became a man to be crucified so that we can enter the kingdom of heaven and be his, and he'd show us his ways and conform us to his ways. And by his authority, we have the privilege, the authority to become his children, who he imparts lives to. He gives us a place in the kingdom and says, stand and do. We'll be held accountable. He'll tell us about all these things and not leave us on our own. We'll have fellowship with him and one another unto the hope set before us, which is Yeshua and the model of his righteousness and everything he said, which is true, so that we know that after this time is over, we will rise up to be with him unto eternity when he comes back and shows us his face as El Shaddai, the consuming fire, and burns up everything that is not of his essence of fire, that we will be conformed in the fellowship of his fire and become fire like him unto the accomplishment of the plan, the covenant from the very beginning. That's the gospel. That's the covenant. That's his relationship with us that he determined from the beginning, but it's only for this little piece of time. And unto beyond that is a whole other world that we can't even grasp. So that's, I think we're out of time.
I know we're out of time.